Madison, what's up, man? Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Ryan, great to be here, brother. Thanks for having me.
I know you're busy. You're eating I think you were eating a Snickers before we started. Is that basically like lunch for you anymore? Is just whenever you can catch it?
You know, it is always just about 5 minutes in between each little meeting. And so, I had a sandwich between the 12 and 12:30 hour. And then in between got to have my dessert and had a Snickers. So you gotta reward yourself every now and then. So I get one Snickers a week, and that's it's
Awesome.
peak of my week.
What is the pace like as far as your workload? Is it what you expected? Is it different than you expected, and how are you handling all of that?
Well, no, so that's a great question. Being here in Congress, I would say it's definitely very much so. You think about, kind of Harry Potter, he gets handed a wand. And I mean, that wand can basically do anything. He just doesn't know exactly what it's supposed to do. And that's a lot what it's like being a congressman. I mean, this job can be whatever you make it. So there's some congressmen who really, I mean, they put in, 6 hours a day. There's other congressmen who put in 18 hours a day. So I'm definitely leaning much more towards the 18 hours. And so, especially when we're up here in DC, my team and I, we work 24/7. And so it's the pace is very, very fast, but that's intentional. We put it that way. I mean, we're serving 730,000 people. So yeah, no excuse to be lazy.
Yeah, and you got a lot to do, especially in the wake of everything that's going on right now with COVID and the border and gun control, which I know is a big issue of yours. And I think I saw something the other day, which, by the way, I have to commend you for. I think it's time we have a real serious conversation about daylight savings time.
Yes, indeed. No, I think it is, because I mean, seriously, the unnecessary changes to our clocks. It was made to conserve energy during the world wars. And that's just completely unnecessary. Now our electrical grid is incredible. Our power grid's incredible. We're starting to get very diversified with our energy portfolio. And so I think it says, I mean, personally, I like daylight later in the day. And so it's kind of cool, because if you being in Congress now, if I think of something that I just specifically want to change, I can. I mean, if I want to try and pass a bill to get an American Autobahn, I can do that. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah. So how do you determine what's worthy of your attention and what isn't? Because I know a lot of people, well, let's look at it this way. Let's take gun control, for example, which I know for me anyways, is a very serious issue. Second Amendment rights need to be protected. That's a serious issue. Daylight savings time. Yeah, I would like it, but let's be honest, it's not as serious as gun control and legislation. So how do you determine what you should be focusing on and what isn't worthy of your time and attention?
Absolutely. So, it's very, it's a careful line you have to walk, because we have so many different angles we need to work. And when I first came here, I want to just tackle absolutely everything. But we're given a very generous budget, but unfortunately, that has its limits. And so, I've got a very large legislative team, people who are just masters at writing these bills, literally writing the laws. But man, it just takes a lot of time to be able to get one of these bills hammered out that makes a lot of sense. And so, although, we would love to take every single target we possibly could, because I mean, this is a very target-rich environment with the things that need to be done in this country. You just can't get everything done. And so, we have a deal where if for every single really serious bill we're going to drop, we'll also drop just one really quick, simple fix that's just common sense. So, we just dropped a tax credit bill that would help a lot of small businesses in my district who are being just unrightfully attacked by, the federal government from, COVID-19 mandates.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that bill, you get really into the weeds when you start dealing with taxes. And so that's because I had a lot of heavy lifting to be able to get that. It was called the Better Business for Tomorrow Act. But then in addition to that, our common sense bill was, let's have the Sunshine Protection Act, where we are able to actually make sure that, daylight savings can just go away and we can have sunlight later in the afternoon. And so, for every time we go for just a really easy little bunt like daylight savings, we also want to tackle something that's very serious that affects every American.
Yeah, I think it's important. I've heard you obviously talk about Second Amendment rights. We've got a border crisis, regardless of how you want to paint it. I know there's a lot of words that are being thrown around or not being used because of how it might paint it. But I mean, there is a crisis at the border. We know that. These are serious issues that need to be addressed. And so I'm wondering why you decided that political office was the avenue for you. Because I look at myself personally and I think, at some point, maybe I have some political aspirations, But as of right now, I don't feel like that's the place for me. So I'm wondering why you felt it necessary to throw your hat in the ring and become, one of the youngest, what is it, the youngest representative in over 200 years. That's quite a feat.
Well, you know what? And the guy who beat me, it was unconstitutional, and I think he cheated. His dad unfortunately died in office. His name is William, and he was then appointed to his office, and so he wasn't actually elected. So I always say I'm the youngest elected,
All
but
right,
he was
fair
yeah.
enough.
But no. So the reason I did want to get involved is you were talking about all these major issues that are going on in our country, and I'm sure that you have the exact same feelings that I do. Our generation, the millennial generation, and Gen Z. I mean, what real issue have we ever faced? We've never had a world war. We've never had to deal with a Great Depression. In the 1940s and 50s, children, young boys, young men were going to fight in World War II. Then they were being drafted into Vietnam. Then there was all the Russian scare that was going on when we had the missile crisis. And so we consider everything that's going on, and you look at to our generation, and you realize we really haven't dealt with anything that major. 9/11 was awful, but for whatever reason, the war, I don't know about how it felt for you, but it felt very distant and far away. The war, I think it was very different than the Vietnam War and World War II, because it didn't seem like it was a home front battle. And so because of that, I think that we have bred a generation of soft men, and that generation has created a lot of problems in our society and our culture. Because I think toxic masculinity is men who refuse to stand up and actually do what is right, and take ownership of their country and of their actions. And so I wanted to get involved because I don't want to raise a child in this kind of an environment, one that is just going to just completely tell them, hey, you need to be a victim. You need to try and be as part of as many victim classes as you can be, so people will feel bad for you. No, I want my child to wake up every single day and want to punch the world in the face and say, look, I'm taking over. I'm taking this thing by the horns. I'm going to make a better world for my family.
Yeah, I like that. And I commend you for doing that, because most people are all talk. And even to myself, like I talk for a living. This is what I do for a living. You talk and present for a living, of course, too. But I commend you for doing something that I can't imagine is very comfortable. In fact, if anything, I imagine it's very uncomfortable. You're putting yourself out there. Half of the people that you represent roughly probably don't like you at all. The other half love you, right? So that's got to be a very weird and awkward and uncomfortable situation to be in. So I commend you for thrusting yourself into that arena.
Well, thanks, brother. And I think that our mainstream media, and I think it's also an insult to American culture to call them mainstream, because I don't think what our media reports is anything close to the mainstream of how most people actually feel. It's just so hyper partisan. They've created politicians to be this kind of a reality star type life, where they want to know every single detail about you. They want to know what you eat for dinner, what's your favorite movie is, and they want to know every single detail. And it adds a sense of celebrity to it. So it's got its appeal, but it also makes it to where people start just looking at the person rather than the policy. And because of that, I feel like that's why a lot of people who I think are pushing bad policy are so effective, because they're just pulling on people's heartstrings rather than trying to actually make an effective jump at good policy that's going to help all Americans.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I would also suggest that from a conservative perspective, and I tend to be more conservative in my political beliefs and viewpoints, that the conservative side of the aisle needs to do a better job at attaching the emotional outcome of the policies that they are implementing and recommending and introducing. It seems to be a lot of logical, rational type thinking, and I think that's important. But also, how do we then tie in the emotional appeal to make this something that people actually see as being good and valuable and decent and honorable as well?
Oh, well, right. I say often, I say this on the campaign trail a lot. I feel like the other side of the aisle, they do a really good job of getting people to vote for what feels good. Whereas we try to get people to vote for what actually does good. So, we'll have a very sober-minded person get on Fox News, and they'll say, well, this bill is going to try to increase our national GDP average by 0.3% at the end of the fiscal year. And I mean, that doesn't make somebody wake up and get them excited. I think that what we should be doing is we should be keeping those good policies, but we should be connecting them to dining room politics. How does this affect that young family who's sitting around the dining room table at night with their three young children? And he wants the father wants his children to be able to go to a safe school. He wants them to be able to learn good education without not being too politicized. He wants to be able to worship in the way he wants. He wants to be able to make a good living. He wants to be able to just grow old with his wife and have an incredible life. And so I think if we can connect all of these big national issues that are sometimes pretty daggone boring because you have to get so in the weeds with them, but you can connect those to everyday life and show how that actually makes a difference in our everyday lives, I think that would just change the whole game.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think you need to appeal to both the rational and emotional side of the equation to enact a lot of these changes. I am curious, as a young man yourself, do you ever feel inadequate, or that it's just too overwhelming? I mean, you're dealing with institutions that are over 250 years old, and some of these politicians seem to have been around as long as that. I'm wondering if you ever feel either inadequate, inferior, or if you're treated as such.
You know what? I always say that if you don't have a lot of letters behind your name, PhD, MD, or whatever they are, you sometimes will have to face institutionalism in whatever aspect of life or whatever venture of life you're in. And so when I came here, a lot of these people are former state legislators or state senators, or they might have been a lieutenant governor. And so some of them run multi-million-dollar companies. And these people have incredible resumes. And I'm really honored to be around all these august leaders because I have so many great mentors I can learn from. But obviously, as soon as I came here, I'm 25 years old and I'm doing the exact same thing that these people have been trying to do for a lot of their lives. And, they're twice my age. So I knew that coming into this chamber, people were going to assume that I was either haughty, arrogant, or I was just kind of lucked out on this whole thing. And so I think coming in and trying to perform with competence, I think that speaks louder than any kind of credentials you possibly could have or any kind of age you could possibly have. Because I don't necessarily believe that experience is based on how many years you've been on this earth, but it's really just what you've done with the years that you've been given. But there is something to say for people who have been here for a long time, because I will say there were some discouraging moments where I'll just kind of sit back and say, man, how do you change all this? How do you tackle this entire beast? I mean, you saw Donald Trump, this billionaire, who said, I'm going to come in, I'm going to change the whole thing, I'm going to burn the whole place to the ground. He's the president, the most powerful person on the planet. And then, even he struggled to be able to take this thing by the horns and lead it in the direction that he wanted to. And you've seen that with Ronald Reagan. You've seen that with a lot of really incredible men who came here, men and women. And so sometimes I did get discouraged probably for a few days after I'd been here for about 3 weeks, because I realized, wow, this place really is, that people value seniority here more so than you can possibly imagine. So, if you've been here 22 years, that instantly adds credibility for whatever reason to some people.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to me is, if you have 22 years of doing the wrong thing, that actually gives you some sort of credibility and authority. But if everybody else is doing the wrong thing, then I guess it looks right.
No, you're absolutely correct. And so, that's a big reason I push for term limits. It sounds like a mammoth of a task, and it is, but I genuinely believe that we need to have some kind of congressional term limits, because I've gotten to spend a lot of time going all over the country this past year campaigning, and I have met so many good-hearted, brave Americans that I've said we would never be at a shortage to have good men and women representing us. But just to get back to your question of, do I ever get discouraged up here? Yes, I do. But after I got discouraged, I started feeling bad for myself, and then I kind of snapped out of it a few days later and said, what the heck am I doing? I knew what this was going to be like. I knew this was going to be a mammoth of a task. And I'm here to actually make a difference. I'm not going to back down just because things got hard. And, I think that's a testament to the way my dad raised me.
I commend you for that. Do you ever get concerned with how DC may change you? So my perspective, and I'm just going to speak broadly about politicians, not any politician in particular, just broadly. My perspective is that I think that a lot of politicians get into politics for the right reasons, like you're talking about, to serve, to help, to affect change. And then over time, they become, for lack of a better term, institutionalized, and they just kind of fit into the mold and they find their little place. And I don't think they're doing it out of integrity. I just feel like it's just the path of least resistance and this is just what we do? Do you have concerns that politics will change you or shape you into what currently is rather than where you are right now as someone who's hot and fired up and just ready to go?
Well, I think it's a great question. So when I first got here, I was going through all this orientation process, and I was wondering, we have all these good-hearted Americans who get elected, and they come out. They're these outsiders, they're not part of the establishment at all. They come up here, and then all of a sudden, a few months, a few years go by. Next thing you know, they're just kind of marching to the drum beat of whoever their leader is.
Right.
And so I was wondering what caused that. And now my hypothesis, and I wouldn't say this is foolproof, but I think for the majority of the time, this is correct. Most of the people that come here, they're the baddest in their town. They are the best speakers. They're the best. They've got the greatest ideas. They're the most charismatic. They have the most friends. They have the most connections. And from all their districts, they are in their district. They are the big man on campus. And then you come to Washington, D.C., and you're not special anymore because everybody is. And everybody here is incredibly talented. Everybody is brilliantly smart. Obviously, I think there's a lot of politicians who do a lot of asinine things. But at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of people here are well above the average ordinary person that you meet on the road. But the problem is that you get up here and you're used to being this kind of august leader and people always looking to you and things coming easy to you. And then you start having to deal with a lot of other people who are just as talented as you are, who went through just as difficult of campaigns as you did, who had the exact same experiences as you. And then you realize that, you might start working really, really hard and you realize that somebody is just outpacing you, rather maybe because it's because of luck, maybe they just have more talent than you, or who knows, maybe it's a combination of both. And then because of that, these people get discouraged and they say, oh, well, you know what, I guess I'm not actually going to get to change all of this. And so when I got up here, I would start asking people, hey, so, what do you do around here? What committees are you on? And so many people, they just kind of hang their shoulders, say, I just do whatever leadership tells me. And I mean, I got to tell you, like our leadership, Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, these guys are badasses. Steve Scalise got shot. He gave a speech a few days later. I mean, he's incredible. Kevin McCarthy is an incredible speaker, an incredible politician. And he's also a pretty daggone conservative, which is something that I really appreciate in leadership. But, I can understand how a lot of people, you come here and you go up against these incredibly formidable men and women, and then you get outplayed on every single front. And then you say, well, you know what? I guess I'm not going to make that big of a difference. I'm just going to, just go along to get along. And but then you go back to your district and you're all cool back in your district, but then you come here and people are discouraged. And so, that's why I think that we need people who have a lot stronger backbones, so that when they do come up here, it's like, I don't care how much adversity I face. I don't care how much failure I face. I don't care how difficult the road is. We're just going to keep pushing until we fix it.
I like that. And I can certainly appreciate the idea, the concept of a backbone, because it seems like so many politicians are, look, I mean, you're putting yourself, not just you, but anybody in DC is putting themselves in a very compromising position. But then it seems like so many waffle and flake out on the things they talk about as being important, or that their constituents are calling them in and emailing them about saying, this is important to me. So I wish, more of our leaders or elected officials would have that backbone. So let me riff on something you said a second ago. You talked about term limits. What are your political aspirations? If you're trying to but support this idea of term limits, do you have political aspirations above and beyond what you're doing now?
You know what? If the opportunity comes up for me to serve in a bigger capacity, as of right now, I don't think Washington D.C.'s changed me to become part of this kind of an establishment pawn. So I would love to be able to serve in any capacity that my constituents needed me to. I'm really just focused on being a congressman right now, but I believe that the term limits need to be pretty daggum long, because you cannot get a lot done here. The way our founders set up this process, it's not made to be done quickly. And so, I think that, if you spend 12 years in the House, I think that's about enough time. If you can't get something done in 12 years, then I probably don't want you representing me anyways. And so I think that would be a way to get rid of a lot of this institutionalism, where there's people, have been here 30 years, or Nancy Pelosi's literally been elected longer than I've been alive. And so it's an interesting outlook there. But if I could do anything and snap my fingers, I'd want to be governor of North Carolina. It's the state that raised me. And I just think that we've all seen so much of how important our governors are throughout the coronavirus. Before I probably couldn't tell you my favorite. If someone said, "Hey, who's your favorite governor?" I said, "I don't even know who my own governor is." But now you see him
Yeah.
on the news every day.
And I think the governor's role should become more and more integral in our nation, as well as we see a lot of dissenting voices among what is happening and what is not happening in the way that this country should be ran. I believe in state sovereignty, so I think that should become more and more important. And I'm also glad that you talked about term limits with a longer term. You said 12 years. I used to be a huge proponent of shorter term limits. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Sean Parnell, who ran for office in Pennsylvania. You may be familiar with him. And he talked to me about that. He's like, the problem with short-term limits is just what you said. You just can't get anything done. It just grinds to a halt, and you need to be able to understand how the systems and how the dynamic works to be able to get anything pushed through. And you can't just do that in 2 years.
You're absolutely right. And I have met Sean Parnell, really great guy. I hope he runs for Congress again. I really think he could get it. He just ran in a bad year for where he was at. Yeah, but you know what? Yeah, that is exactly why I think, him and I are the exact same mind. You do need a good amount of time to be able to get stuff done, but you also don't need to be here for 30 years. Because really the big reason I don't think you should be here for 30 years is when I start thinking of what happens in Washington, D.C., people seem so disconnected from normal America. Everything they say is always through the lens of, hey, will I be able to actually fundraise well off this? Or will this get my base fired up? And so, I gave a floor speech the other day talking about Second Amendment rights. And I said, I know here in Washington, D.C., you can get sucked in the bubble. And so when you guys say, come and take it, that's a good thing that you can go, the NRA will retweet you, and then you'll get a few donors from the NRA, everything's working well. But then I said, but in normal America, in real America, outside of this DC bubble, when we say come and take it, we damn well mean it. And so it's saying, if you're going to come for our guns, if you're going to come for our right to be able to defend ourselves and our families and what we love, then you've got another thing coming. And so I think that speaks to the American ethos, just one that needs to be just rough and individualistic.
Well, and I think what you're doing by stepping into the arena is proving that you aren't just talk. Because when I hear, again, I'm speaking broadly, a lot of politicians that I listen to, even Senate hearings, I listen to these Senate hearings. I'm like, what? Why are we doing this? This is just a show. Nothing's going to come from this. It's a bunch of hyperbole. It's a bunch of posturing, and nothing different is going to happen as a result of this hearing or this floor speech, which, for example, I heard you give, must have been a week or so ago, maybe a little longer. But when I see somebody who is actually putting themselves out there and sacrificing, that to me is an individual who's willing to back up their words. And that's what we need more of.
No, you're absolutely correct on that. Yeah. So, I actually, have one second, let me grab something. So I just ordered this. This is a Roman gladius. And so, I think the Roman legions, they're probably my favorite. If I had to study any kind of ancient warfare, they're probably my favorite little troops to think about. But so, yeah, I got this Roman gladius. I've got a few other things on the way. I got a buddy at Blackguard Customs who's making me a really cool battle axe with it'll be all carved well. And I got another guy making this Spartan sword. And so I have someone making this little painting and saying, in everything you do, be as ferocious as a Viking, taking advantage of every opportunity you have. Be as well thought out and planned and tactical as a Roman. Always making sure that you have your supply line set up, making sure that you count the cost of your tower before you start building it. And then you got the Spartan sword, and it says it'll say and be as disciplined as a Spartan. And so I'm going to put those things all throughout my office, hanging up around here, because I think that really captures kind of the ethos of what it means to be, a man, and really just somebody who is effective. You read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I highly recommend. It's an older book, but the truths in it are timeless. But when you really start thinking about, what it means to be a man, I think that it is incumbent upon anybody to get involved inside of their way they possibly can civically, because, I was robbed of my opportunity to be able to serve my country in the military. They didn't want me to fight as a Marine in a wheelchair, which doesn't make any sense to me because I'm very deadly downhill. And so I was, I'm very upset about that. But
I can see why.
first person in my family's history since 1777 to not be a Marine. And so for first really generation of males to not do that. And so that really weighs heavily on me. But I found a way that I would be able to serve, and that is by going to Washington, D.C. to be able to support, good policy and really fight this culture battle head on for the next generation. So, I think if anybody's listening to this, I encourage you guys, just get in the freaking arena. There's a great quote that says, you'll hear words from the critics who are sitting in the stands all the time, but blessed is the man who is in the arena.
Yeah, I've actually got that poem, The Man in the Arena, an excerpt from Theodore Roosevelt's speech just right over here on the wall. So yeah, I can attest to the power of that. I look at it every single day. So you're hitting on an interesting point that I wanted to discuss, because I know that there's a lot of men who listen to this podcast and are tuned into what we're doing who might be suffering from a medical condition or an illness or a disability, and they believe that it affects and impacts their masculinity. And I wanted to ask how you feel about your own accident and how that impacted you and your belief of who you were as a man.
That's a really, really great question. So I'll speak real bluntly about, how things went for me. Got into my accident, spent several months in the ICU. Then I got out of the ICU, went to a rehab hospital. All in all, I spent a little over a year in the hospital trying to learn how to live again, letting my body all heal. They put a significant amount of titanium all throughout my body. I've got a lot of medical biotech in my body that keeps me ticking and all kinds of stuff. But I remember, everything was going pretty well for me. And then probably I'd been out of the ICU for about 2 months. I had just started getting up and getting into a wheelchair. And I still was completely under the impression that I was going to get better. That by Christmas I'd be out of there. I was at a full ride scholarship at NC State for the NROTC. I was just really thinking, I was like, man, my life will get back on track. I'll go back and it's fine. But then I had just gotten up in a wheelchair, and I very tactfully, my hospital wing had no mirrors in it. I recognized at one point. And so then I went to this bathroom and realized, there's a mirror in there. I haven't seen myself in 5 months. And then I rolled in front of it. Now, before my accident, I was about, I fluctuated between 215, 220. And I was, 6'2", 6'3". I had a good presence about me. When I would go out in a crowd, I would notice people would check me out, and I felt cool. I felt like I was doing stuff right.
Sure.
And then I looked into the mirror, and brother, I had lost almost 80 pounds. And when I looked in that mirror, my face was sunken. I looked like a skull. And I realized just how damaged I was at that moment. Then I started talking to a lot of my doctors, and then they let that realization come onto you just naturally. And then they kind of talk to you about the realities, and they're saying, yeah, well, if you ever want to go hunting again, you can, but everything's going to be different. You're going to have to, bring all these extra equipment. You're going to have to do this. And then, there's all the emasculating things of having to be actually taken care of for so long in the hospital. And fortunately I got a great brother and a great father who really did that for me. They took care of everything, and it was never a word spoken about it. But that was a time when I started getting very, very down. And then I just thought, I can barely speak. My diaphragm had ruptured. I had traumatic brain injury, so my thinking was even slower. I had traumatic nerve damage, which is called neuropathy. So I was in all these terrible phantom pains, which weren't even real. They were just in my head. And it was like almost a scar of my legs being on fire going through my brain. And then, I looked like I was some kind of druggie. My arms were about the size of my wrist all the way up and down.
Wow.
And I felt like I wasn't a man. I felt like I was completely useless. If somebody attacked me at that time, if somebody attacked my family, literally they would be in more danger if I was there than if I wasn't. And that was probably the most emasculating thing for me to think about. And so fast forward, I get out of the hospital. Things are progressing, but you know what? I'm working for my congressman at the time. He had been my debate mentor. He had nominated me to go to the Naval Academy. Really great guy. And so that was giving me some confidence back. But I didn't feel like a man. I felt very weak, and I felt very feeble. And then I remember one day my dad had a really tough conversation with me, and it was basically saying, son, you're going to need to make a decision. You either need to give up or you need to move on. and live in spite of your ritual. And I can't imagine how hard that was for a father to say something like that, basically saying, this is your ultimatum, son, you need to make it. And just imagine how to say that to your child. And then he left the room. I remember I stayed there for a really long time. I ended up making a little T-graph of pros and cons of staying alive.
Really?
Ended up deciding to continue with life. And from that moment on, I said, you know what? I don't care if I'm in a wheelchair. I'm going to be the best I possibly can be. And so then, I started getting back in shape. I started really taking advantage of all the opportunities I had at my disposal. Really started to just not just sitting back and saying, well, I'm going to heal eventually. I said, hey, you know what? I'm probably not going to heal. And that's okay, because I'm going to work 6 times harder and be more successful than I even was going to be when I could walk. And then that is really when I think I came out of that funk, and I now I look at myself, and man, I'm about to get married. And so, we're talking about these men, some men who are dealing with some physical issues, dealing with physical deficiencies, whether it's medical or mental or whatever it is. And, I'm about to get married. I just want to carry my wife across the threshold. I just want to pick her up and go run into the waves and take her surfing Hawaii. But, I can't do that. And, I still allow myself to have feelings every now and then. I put up barriers in my mind to not allow me to get into this little circle of despair where I just feel bad for myself at all times. But I also really buckled down on the fact that, I do have to allow myself to cry every now and then. And, I just held my fiance and I just wept the other night. And it was just, and I was telling her, honey, I'm so sorry that, I'm not all there. I'm not perfect. I'm not everything I want to give you. And then, but she's the best. She's literally the best woman on the planet. She's a CrossFit superstar. She's a physician's assistant. She's incredible. And she actually decided to make our wedding on the anniversary of my car accident. And so it really just changes the history of that day for me. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up, but I don't mean to tear up old wounds. I just know that this conversation can serve people, and I'm glad you brought up your fiance, because you're right. I don't know her other than she's an incredible athlete. She's extremely fit, and I've wondered how the dynamic with you and her worked, and how she was supportive, and how that maybe threatened what you felt, you should be, and what that relationship looked like. It's such an important conversation, because there's men out there who are dealing with very similar circumstances to you.
Yeah, because we as men, we always have this innate nature where we want to be the badass. We want to be able to take care of everything. Our wife never needs to lift a finger or whatever. And we can talk about normal gender roles or whatever, but I think it's innate in most men. They want to take care of their families.
Right.
And man, a lot of times, I can't carry boxes into my house. I can't get up on a ladder and change a light bulb. And so I got to trust Christina to take care of all that. But man, you know what? She's probably she's much thicker skinned than me, and she's much more even keeled. And so, she's able to handle it a lot better than I am. But I'll tell you, she's a rock star, man. She really is. And she does a great job of encouraging me in the things that I can do. And also, just telling me that, hey, you know what? You're acting like a bitch right now. You're using your wheelchair as an excuse. Let's go. Be a man.
Yeah.
And so
she says that to you?
Oh man, she said that to me the other night. She really
I
did.
like
It's
that.
Fantastic.
I'm glad you're talking about the importance of having the right people with your wife saying what you need to hear in the right moment, whether it's getting after you a little bit or easing up. But then also your father, it sounds to me that your father knew, even though he had to give you a difficult ultimatum, or at least present that to you, that he knew by saying that, with your personality and your relationship with him, that you would choose the right path. Would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that is the reason that my dad did decide to do that. And I think that's something that's so important that I think we oftentimes miss out on. I think it's played down our culture how much we need community as men. I feel like we need to have a network of other people that are like-minded. You people can say, oh yeah, well that guy's a real alpha male, that guy's this, or they can try and put you in a box, but there is no doubt that there are a certain subsect of people who think the exact same way. That they have the exact same standard of themselves. They hold themselves to the absolute highest standard. And so, I've got a buddy who owns a steel company. I got another buddy who owns a paving company. I'm a politician, and but we all really hold ourselves to the highest level of standard we possibly can. And having that network of guys and brothers, I mean, I kind of refer to my dad now more as a brother than a dad because we're just so close. But having those guys who can sit there and, they can cry with you if they need to, but they can also, kind of push you up against the wall and say, hey man, you got to take this by the horns, and no one's going to be able to do this for you. You got to do it on your own. That's something that's so important. So yeah, an encouragement I would give to everyone, because I know before my accident, I didn't feel like I needed anybody. It's made me get a lot closer to God, because, I feel like I really need him now. And I realize that I'm pretty feeble on my own. But also we're built for community, I believe, as men. And so I would encourage everybody, you might be a badass right now, but you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You could be in a car accident, wind up in the ICU, just like me, in a wheelchair. And if you don't have a group of brothers to be around you right then, your life's going to be really, really hard. And so I think that's critically important to have that community.
Yeah. And thank you for talking about the idea of humility as well, whether it's humble before God or somebody who might be listening who doesn't believe in God, and just being humble in general. Man, look, here's how I look at it. And I think you would attest to this based on your life experiences. You're either going to be humble or you're going to get humbled. Those are the only two options. So if you can get out ahead of it and just stay humble, it's not to say that you aren't going to deal with hardships, obviously. I just think it's more manageable if you can stay humble as opposed to waiting to be humbled.
You are absolutely correct. I mean, I would say that humility was probably, and probably in a lot of ways still is, but it's my biggest struggle with my personal development, specifically before the accident. And I think the fact that I was so arrogant and haughty, it made my accident so much harder, because, I didn't want to have to accept help or need somebody to be there for me. And so you need to have a mindset that you're the baddest man walking into whatever aspect of life you are at the moment, so that you're not afraid to step into the fray and take on whatever you need to, whether that's in business, whether that's in a life-saving event, whether that's on a football field, whatever it is. But you also need to have the humility to know that you can't do everything on your own. And so that's a hard dichotomy to walk, but I hear this term a lot. I've got a really hard time with a lot of cultural Christians. And I say cultural Christians because there's a lot of cultural Christianity that I think is not really based in the Bible and stuff. And people take this idea of meekness. The Bible calls us to be meek. They kind of skew it to almost mean weakness.
Weak, cowardly, pathetic. Yes,
exactly. You're just kind of, I don't want to offend anybody. I'm sorry if I'm getting in your way. I was raised by a dad who said, meekness means you have perfect power under perfect control. And, everyone always wants to talk about how Jesus turned the other cheek, but Jesus also walked into the temple, flipped a bunch of freaking tables, pulled out a bullwhip and started beating people with it. And so I feel like you really need to be able to embody both of those aspects to be a real man.
That's a good point. There's a time and a place for everything. There's a time for humility and even just being reserved or quiet, but then there's a time for, to speak up. I've heard you do it. I watched you do it at the national convention, where you spoke up about what you believed, and then you literally stood up. I saw it a week or two ago when you gave that presentation on the Second Amendment on the House floor, where you made a stand and you stood up. So I can certainly appreciate what you're saying. I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier. We glossed over some things that were important to me. You talked about in DC how you may not have as much credibility or respect or authority if you don't have a bunch of letters behind your name. Now, did you went to college? Do you have a degree? I can't remember.
No, man, I went to college for 1 year and I dropped out.
That's right. That's what I thought.
Yes,
so
indeed.
How do people view that?
Well, again, it comes down to competence. And so obviously there's some things that have to be overcome. And so I literally tried to get onto the Education and Labor Committee, which deals with higher education, K through 12, preschool, everything. And, I had so many people that were like, you want to be on the Education Committee? Everyone here has got a PhD or they've got all these things. And then I said, yes, I absolutely want to be. And I had to sit there and really fight for my right to be able to be on this committee, because I genuinely believe that, I think the metric a lot of American parents view success through is, did I get my child to a 4-year degree university? And if I did that, then I'm successful. Whereas
Right.
I think that has robbed our country of a lot of really great talent because people think that they either need to be a doctor or a lawyer to be successful. Whereas I know a lot of plumbers and electricians who are making a whole lot of money than all my friends who are in law school right now.
And their standard of
And
living is probably significantly better as well.
exactly. I
Not
mean,
just from a financial standpoint, but being available for their family and hobbies and activities and whatnot.
you are absolutely correct, and they're not crushed by all this immense debt. And so, I've got a line I say pretty often, but I don't think that our country is better served by getting more people with 4-year degrees in Egyptology than it is by sending people to get an education and a trade skill. And now, this is by no means a knock on higher education. I like to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. All my staff, I'm the dumbest person in the room whenever I'm with them. And so, I've got a lot of people who've got a lot of degrees and letters after their name. My soon-to-be wife here in a couple of weeks, she's a physician's assistant. I'm glad she went to do all of her schooling because she has people's lives and death in her hands when she does anesthesia. Sure. But I don't think that that's necessarily for everybody, and so that's why I wanted to get on the Education and Labor Committee. And so the reason that I think that it's yes, you have to, if you're going to go through life without all the certifications that make people feel important, you're going to have to be able to prove yourself that you don't need that certification because you have the ability to handle the task. And I think that's where it's the whole thing. Do you want other people to say you're competent, or do you want to be able to prove you're competent through your own work?
Yeah, good point. And if I understand correctly, you were homeschooled as well. Is that right?
All the way through. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's interesting. My wife and I just started homeschooling our children 2 years ago when we made a move across the country, and it's presented its fair share of challenges, no doubt. My daughter is dyslexic. That makes it challenging. We're trying to figure out how to deal with that. But I'll tell you, it's one of the greatest blessings that we've ever had in raising our children is to be present and available for their education.
And I think that's so critically important because I feel like our modern education system, and obviously we have to have some kind of public education system, but I don't think that we should have a federal Department of Education. If I could do anything, I would abolish the whole department and send it back to the states and allow the states to really take control of this. But the thing that I got out of homeschooling that was so great is you do not have to be. It's not so standardized. If you ask a fish to go climb a tree, it's going to fail. But it doesn't mean that fish isn't talented. And your daughter probably learns in a significantly different way than a lot of normal students do. And so whenever you're in a classroom of 30 students, it's always having to be taught to the lowest common denominator instead of to whatever that child's strengths are. And so I think that homeschooling and private schooling and seeking just different forms of education is a really beneficial thing because everybody's created differently. And we all learn in different ways. We all have different skills, but that doesn't mean that you're less beneficial than people who are really good at sitting down and taking tests. I test really, really well, but I also study very poorly. And so I can get through class, and I'll seem like I'm making all the A's in the world. And then I've got a lot of friends who test really poorly, and they're hanging out at a C average, but they know the material significantly better than I do. And so, but my mom recognized that. And so whenever she would test me, it was not just hey, you have to sit down and give a brain dump and then leave. She gave me a love for learning rather than a love for memorization.
I like that concept because I feel like as a society as a whole, we've done a poor job fitting people into these paths that they have to follow. And if they don't follow them, that they're perceived as inferior. I even see it with the differences and distinctions between men and women. I think the hardcore feminist movement has done a disservice, for example, to women because they've convinced millions and millions of women that they have to be men in order to be valuable. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. We're different inherently, biologically, emotionally, hormonally. Not one or the other is better. We're just different. And we ought to play into those paths a little bit more effectively than maybe we have in the past.
You know what? That's a dicey subject, and I'm sure most politicians would shy away from this. But this is something I think we really need to tackle. So I'm glad you bring this up because I think that there is a concerted effort to really try and get rid of the nuclear family in our country right now, and it's by people who want to have the government having more power. Because if you get rid of the nuclear family, people will rely more on the government. And so
can I stop you right there on that?
Yeah,
and I need to stop you on that because I actually agree with what you're saying, but I'm trying to see it from both sides. Being an insider, we'll call you an insider, being an insider to what's going on, do you really feel like that's the case, that there's this active and deliberate strategy to undermine the nuclear family? Or do you think that just happens to be the result of misguided ideology?
No, I think there's an active and deliberate attempt to try and get rid of the nuclear family. Let me unpack that for you a little bit. And so this we might go over our hour mark, brother, but this is too good of a conversation. So I believe that there is an active effort by a lot of people to get people more reliant on the government, because people are now starting to believe in equity over equality. And so you may have heard this from a lot of different groups that are kind of on the fringe of the far left. And we've got our crazies on the far right too that are on the fringe, that they need to be denounced.
Oh yeah, there's a broad spectrum.
A broad spectrum, problems on both sides for sure. But there's this fringe element on the left that's starting to say we want equity instead of equality. Now, I believe words are extraordinarily important. And so when people say they want equality, I'm saying I want us all to have an even starting line. I don't want your zip code or your race or your religion to determine how successful you are in my country. I want it to be based upon your content of your character. But if you start, then that's believing in equity, saying everyone starts from a basic starting line, and then where you end up is going to differ depending on how much effort and talent you have.
You're saying that's equality.
Yes, that's equality. That's
equality.
But then when people start preaching that they want equity, that means they don't want an equal starting line. They want an equal finish line. Mm-hmm. And so they want everybody to have just an even share of the pie. But at the end of the day, that's just equal amounts of poverty rather than differing amounts of wealth, in my opinion. And so I think that the reason they want to get rid of the nuclear family is because these people who are trying to preach that they want equity, there is a concerted effort, I believe, that has robbed a lot of the African-American community. I think it's probably the number one plague in our inner cities. And it's for whatever reason this has happened. We have seen, I've got a dear friend, Burgess Owens, who talks on this very, very well. And I wish he was here to explain it in better detail, because he's grown up in this community. But there is the worst epidemic we have going on in our African-American, a lot of our minority communities, is fatherless homes. And this happens in white communities as well, but it's a higher ratio in African-American communities. And I think that the reason why a lot of people, you see a lot of gang violence and a lot of aggression in our inner cities, is because there are not a lot of dads inside of homes there. And I think that, I was taught that I'm a hatchet. My dad gave me a hatchet when I was a young boy. And, if you know anything about a hatchet, it's a lot different than an axe, because it's got a blade side on one side. The back side is kind of flat like a hammer. And my dad always taught me, son, you are this hatchet. So every single day you wake up, you can decide to kill and destroy with the blade, or you can decide to flip it over and build and try and make something better. And so, but basically the whole lesson behind that is you need to have self-control. You have incredible abilities as a man. You have incredible strength. You have incredible agility. You can be a violent person. You can try and rule through violence, or you can try and build something that's good for everybody. And so, I use that analogy a lot whenever I'm talking to young men. It's just that you're a hatchet. And so I think that when people want to create equity in an equitable society where everyone has equal amounts of everything, that means that, someone who comes from a stable 2-parent household with a very active and engaged father, I genuinely believe that gives them an advantage in life. And so I think these people who are now trying to push for equity, they're trying to get rid of the nuclear family because it's an unfair advantage that a lot of people have. And I believe that there is a concerted effort for this. And let me tell you one last thing. When you see these people in Washington, D.C., they don't care what means they have to go through to get to power. There are some people up here. I don't want to get too overly political on this. I'm not going to name names.
Yeah.
But there are people here who will literally just choose whatever side they think is going to win. And they don't actually care about the values. And so they don't actually care that people want equity or equality. They just care how many people want equity, how many people want equality. If it's 51% want equity, I'm taking that one because that's going to give me more political power. And people get off on it. I mean, there's a thrill to command here. And these people really, it's a drug that people sort of worshiping at the altar of power. So yes, I do believe that there is a concerted effort to get rid of the nuclear family.
That's good. I'm glad you're bringing that up, because as we acknowledge and recognize these things, and you know what, I don't think a lot of people are willing to acknowledge that. They don't want to, or they don't believe it, but we have to acknowledge the threats. And what I've heard a lot of people say, I bet you get this a lot too, fear mongering. Oh, you're fear mongering. Look, it isn't fear mongering to point out the potential threats. How can you face an enemy? How can you deal with problems if you aren't willing to take a good, long, objective look at what's actually happening? That's not fear mongering. That's realistic.
No, you're absolutely correct, and I think that's so important, is that we are able to have these real conversations. And so there was a guy on Joe Rogan the other day, whose name is Michael Malice, and he was on there, and I don't know what the podcast was about, but they were talking about different kind of bodybuilders. And so you've got the guys who are the heavyweights. Most of them do steroids, and there's the giant guys, but then there's also the swimsuit guys who just have great six-pack abs. They look like Zac Efron from High School Musical. But then Michael Mouse is telling Joe Rogan, he's like, oh, but the reason why they wear board shorts is because they don't do legs. They've got really small quads. And then Joe Rogan's was like, what? No way. He's like, yeah, they skipped leg day like Madison Cawthorn. And then obviously, I'm in a wheelchair, so it was a low blow on Michael's part. And so obviously a lot of people got really pissed. I know I've had 1,000 people send me that clip.
Yeah.
And, I just sent him back, and, Michael is he's kind of a smaller guy. So I was like, hey man, yeah, I might skip leg day, but I guarantee I can beat you arm wrestling.
I saw that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I did a podcast with him, and it went fantastic. And we got to have this real conversation where, he's definitely on the much further away spectrum of politics than I am.
Right.
And,
sure.
but he is somebody who I really respect, because he's an honest communist, basically. Not really. He's an honest far left, and I'm a very honest guy on the far right. But we were able to sit down and discuss things, and we realized that we agreed on 80% of the issues, and we agreed on a lot of things. We had to have a difficult conversation. So I think what you were just saying, we need to have the ability to sit down and have a real conversation and call out, what's wrong in society, because I think if we do, a lot of people actually agree, and we're a lot closer together than we are far apart.
Well, this is part of the challenge that I have with even these COVID restrictions is, let's not worry about COVID for sake right now. But a lot of the problem with the restrictions is that we aren't able to congregate. We're not able to get together face to face. We've been told that, we can't go to public outings in large groups, or go to events or venues, or congregate in church. And this is actually where the conversations happen. This is where we actually need to be talking to each other, even with people. Look, I go to church with people I probably disagree with politically, but we come together over common ground, and then we can talk about some of these other ideas through common and shared interest. And that's where the real change takes place.
You are so right. And if you want to look at it from a really cynical perspective, they can't, the big brother, whoever they are, they can't limit the interactions we have person to person. But if we have to live all of our lives through this screen right here or over social media, we've seen that big tech can censor whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And, right now it's not so overt. I mean, it's gotten pretty bad, but I think that it could get a lot worse. And so I think that it's so important that we cling to our First Amendment right of congregation and being able to speak to one another, because you're absolutely right. When we get together, there's a Democrat who I thought was just a psychopath. And him and I was like, man, I heard him give a speech on the floor. And I was like, this guy is just an idiot. We do not agree on anything. Sure. But then just a few days ago, I was down in the gym with him, and we just were having a normal conversation. And he was giving me a spot on a lift, and then we just had a normal conversation. I was like, well, actually, you're not an idiot. You're that. I completely understand where you're coming from. Completely disagree, but now it all makes sense. And so I feel like, with these COVID restrictions, it is really driving us further apart. And I think that's why you're starting to see so much partisanship, taking place in all aspects of life, because we're not together. We're driven apart, and we just live in these echo chambers on either Fox News or MSNBC.
That's an interesting image. I'm almost thinking of some sort of meme or cartoon where you and this other individual who do not agree politically are spotting each other on lifts, and how that actually plays out. Was he a successful lifting partner? I mean, he was. You're still here, so I guess he didn't.
Yes, he was very successful. And actually, he was doing 225 for reps, which I didn't know Democrats were capable of doing. So I was very impressed.
I don't know if we want to end it on that one, because if we do, man, I can't tell you how many calls and emails. So I appreciate you making my life harder for a little bit as I get the calls and emails and people
Oh,
telling me I shouldn't have had
you
you
know
on.
that you know that it's just a joke. I have found that there are some extraordinarily manly men on both sides of the aisle, and there are people that I genuinely respect. Especially a lot of the old timer congressmen I've met up here, guys who've been here a long time. That they've seen kind of a lot of the partisanship. They come up here, but then they realize, we're all here just for the American people. So I'm hoping that this new breed, this new generation of Republicans and Democrats who have come up here, this kind of new freshman class, we're very partisanly divided right now, but I hope that we can realize, hey, the American people genuinely need help right now. And we really need to work together to get that done. And I think that is the calling on every man and woman in America. It's to make this place a better country for the next generation.
Well, Madison, I appreciate you, man. I know you're a busy guy. You got a ton to do. Look, I commend you. I honor you for stepping into this calling and this work when I imagine it just cannot be an easy thing. Uh, it's incredible. It's incredible to see a young man like actually stepping into what he believes in, putting himself out there, making the sacrifices. And I honor you for doing that. And thanks for taking some time to join us on the call today. I got 1,000 other notes. We might have to run it back soon because I got 1,000 other things I wanted to talk with you about, but we'll call it quits for the time being.
All right, Ryan. Well, hey, in a couple months, let's get one together again.
All right, brother. Let's do it. Talk soon.
All right, brother. Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.